Intimacy under the condition of persecution. Gay male relationships in Vienna between 1938 and 1945. Apologies at the beginning that I will read my paper. In the following, I will give you an overview about the system of prosecution and some case stories, and discuss the matter of intimacy, of what kind of relationships are presented us from these historic files. When I was asked if I could hold a paper at the second Non-Monogamist and Contemporary Intimacies Conference, I hesitated what I, as an archivist and historian, could have to say about monogamous or non-monogamous relationships and contemporary intimacies. Since I am not an expert in queer theory, I decided to follow an old proverb. I've looked it up in the dictionary. A cobbler should stick at his last. So I offered the organizing committee to talk about the persecution of gay men in the time of National Socialism. While I do not talk about lesbian women, we can probably clear in the discussion. One of my most important research fields in the last decade. Based on selected case histories, I will explore in my paper different forms of relationships between men whose traces we have found in the files of the Viennese Criminal Court from 1938 to 1945. When I say we, I mean QWIEN, the Center for Gay and Lesbian Culture and History, and the researchers that worked for a project that started in 2013. The namely registration of homosexual and transgender victims of National Socialism in Vienna. We digitalize and preserve all preserved records of cases that pursued homosexual men and women in Viennese courts and made the first study on gay men in the military court. These court files are one of the most important sources to reconstruct LGBTIQ life in Viennese history. Only a few ego documents, as we say, as letters, diaries, photographs, are handed down to us because in a time of persecution, these personal papers could easily become evidence for one's deviant sex life, lifestyle, or identity, in case they were found in the course of a house search by the police. The foundation of this prosecution was paragraph 129(1)b that was effective from 1852 to 1971. Even during the time of National Socialism, the Austrian Penalty Code was in force. The paragraph criminalized consenting same-sex relationships between men and between women. In more than 700 court files from the time of 1938 to 1945, more than 2,400 male and 79 female defendants could be traced. A handful of the individuals we found we would identify today as trans or inter, but they were persecuted as gay men by the Kripo and the Gestapo during the Nazi time. A short side note on the prosecution of trans people in the time of National Socialism. Sorry. I should have opened that before. Ilse Reiter-Zattlokal, a professor at the Institute of Legal History and the History of Constitution at the University of Vienna, recently described two case files that allow a new insight into the prosecution of trans persons in the NS time. In both cases, NS courts permitted the change of gender from female to male without sex reassignment surgery. In both cases, the lack of any evidence of homosexual relationships was crucial for this positive decision. My colleagues Manuela Bauer, Hannes Sulzenbacher, Christoph Treibelmeier and me will publish next year an article in a special queer issue of ÖZG, Österreichische Zeitschrift für Geschichtsforschung, on the social background and on questions of self-identity of the victims and their external perception by the prosecuting agency. I will present you some details from this study to give you a better view of the construction of the persecution. For our study, we selected 434 case records randomly, which were the basis for our statistical evaluation. Until March 1938, the Kripo, the criminal police, was in charge of prosecuting homosexuals. Immediately after the so-called Anschluss, a second police was created, the Gestapo, which seized the Hotel Metropole at the Mordsimplatz. Both had special departments for persecution of homosexuals. Within the Kripo, the Department of Offenses Against Morality was in charge, whereas the Gestapo Department 2S was specialized on combating abortion and homosexuality. As a consequence of this, in the years 1938 and 1939, the number of detentions of homosexual men and women raised dramatically, as the sociologists I don't know anything about their political orientation. Albert Müller and Christian Fleck calculated the number of proceedings against homosexuals doubled from 1937 to 38. In 1939, they reached a peak with 4.5 times as many as 37. This here is the number of detentions. This is from our study with the 434 cases. There are 37. This has to do with our selection because some of the proceedings of the investigation started in 1937. So it's not exact the graph, but it's from our study to show you that in 38 and 39. And then, what becomes clear is that with the beginning of the Second World War in September 1939, the numbers fall. A decree of Reinhard Heydrich ordered that the Gestapo had to withdraw from cases of homosexuality. From then on, more or less, only the criminal police, the Kripo, was persecuting gay men and lesbian women. Gestapo and Kripo had different working methods. The Gestapo officers worked in their headquarters at Mordsimplatz, looking for delinquents in old court files, handling denunciations, or keeping track of information they got from other authorities. The Kripo officers worked in the streets, raiding public places like parks, toilets, or bathhouses. They did not raid any bar. We have no evidence that any gay bar of the time was raided by the police. They really only went to places where they could find men having sex in flagranti. That's in a pub where when they were talking together, when they were having fun together, they were not interested in that. They were just interested in the sex, and I will come to that more often. But it's also interesting, they did not raid the more classy bathhouses, like the Diana Bad or the Central Bath, which is today the exclusively gay Kaiserbründel sauna, or only on some occasions the also very exclusive Römerbad. It was a handful of men that worked under Chief Officer Karl Seiringer at the Kripo, which regularly visited the steam bath of the proletarian Esterhazy bath in the 6th district in Vienna. They sometimes went to the Esterhazy bath once a week, observed men having sex in the steam room and arrested them when they left the bathhouse. Or here we have from our study calculated the social background of the persecuted, and you see only a few are from the upper classes. Most of them are from lower or the lowest classes. This might be the reason why the persecution of LGBTIQs in the NS time can be described as class justice, because of a majority of the convicted men came from lower social classes. And now I start with some case stories, what kind of relationships we can find in these files. And I will concentrate on three bigger cases and give you a little information about that. First, part-time monogamy. Most of the men in our sample did not live in relationships at all. They were arrested in semi-public places like bathhouses, parks, or restrooms, while looking for sexual encounters or new partners. Sometimes we can find hints for longer relationships, as in the case of the 45-year-old actor Friedrich Links, who was arrested end of November 1941. The 20-year-old private Eugen Čubava had named him during a police interrogation. Čubava was arrested on a charge of desertion, but when questioned by the Kripo, criminal assistant Karl Seidinger, who was an expert for gay men, he confessed that he had homosexual encounters with more than 10 different men for cash. Čubava confessed that he acted as a hustler for several years. One of his partners was Friedrich Links. In his final report, Seidinger summarized. And that's an excerpt of this report. I will translate it roughly. C. Since 1933, Links has been living in Vienna, where he continued his deviant activity with various men and with the Jew Helmut Holzer, a language teacher who emigrated in spring 1939. He had a long-term relationship against nature. D. In the last years until summer 1941, he continued illicit sexual acts with various unknown men by mutual masturbation in a public toilet in the 18th district located Währinger Gürtel, Währinger Straße, next to the Volksoper. I add. Links had invited Čubava to his flat to stay overnight for 3 times. During these nights, they had, as they confessed, reciprocal anal intercourse. For 2 of the 3 nights, Links paid a modest amount, although there is no reference in the proceedings that Čubava demanded a payment. Links stated that he is bisexual, but the interrogating police officer was only interested in homosexual contacts, and so Links' self-identification appears to be a self-serving declaration. We have no indication that the persecuting officers were interested in the sexual identity of the persecuted. They did not search for evidence that Friedrich Links or any other man that professed to be bisexual was in fact bisexual. So we have no evidence that, for instance, female witnesses were asked if they had sex with them to prove that they are bisexual. They were only interested in the illicit sexual acts. During his relationship with Holzer, Links presumably, but we have no evidence, lived monogamously. While he lived promiscuously, having anonymous sex with various men before and after his partnership. Friedrich Links was sentenced to 6 months in prison. Chihuahua was sentenced to 10 years in prison. We know that he survived the Nazi time, but he died at the age of 26 in 1947. We do not know why. We just found his grave at a cemetery in Vienna, so we know that he died in 47. The second case is about Hans Adolf Beer. In another case, the Gestapo started investigation after an anonymous denunciation against Hans Adolf Beer in 1938. Here is this letter of denunciation about Beer. I will not translate it. It's just nice to see. Geehrte Gestapo. This cause is also interesting because a high-level National Socialist unintentionally changed from the side of perpetrators to the side of the victims. Hans Adolf Beer was a not very successful Bavarian opera singer and devoted National Socialist from the early 1920s on. In the 20s and 30s, he had different roles in the party and was a close friend of Siegfried Wagner, the closeted gay director of the Richard Wagner Festspiele Festival in Bayreuth. Since January 1935, Beer lived in Vienna. On behalf of the Ministry of Propaganda in Berlin, he was responsible for the Bühnennachweis, which was a permit that allowed actors, actresses, directors, singers from Germany to work in national Austrian theaters. Only those who were members of the German Reichstheaterkammer, the Reich Theater Chamber, could appear on the scene. Since Jews were not allowed to become member of the Reich Theater Chamber, it was an indirect Aryan paragraph in the national Austrian theaters years before the so-called Anschluss, the annexion of Austria to the Third Reich in 1938. In summer 37, the 47-year-old Beer met the 21-year-old Karl Frey in the Römerbath, one of the bathhouses I already mentioned. Later he confessed that he was fascinated by the beautiful voice of the young man, and so he became his singing coach. After the Anschluss, Beer worked in an agency for opera singers, and so did his lover Karl, after he had quit his military training. Beer lived in the flat of a widow in the 6th district near the Naschmarkt and organized a room for Karl in the same flat. So they worked and lived together for several months. In the course of the Gestapo interrogation, Beer admitted his homosexual orientation. Karl testified that once a week he and Beer masturbated together and that he only accepted it to please his singing teacher. Frey was sentenced to 5 months in prison. Beer was classified as a seducer and convicted to 10 months. After his detention, he was imprisoned in the concentration camp Buchenwald. This was for as long as the Nazi officials wanted. So there was no court that said this guy has to go to the concentration camp or not. It is very unclear who made this decision. But he was imprisoned in Buchenwald. But Beer was lucky. He had powerful friends. The widow of Siegfried Wagner, that's why I mentioned him before, Winifred Wagner, intervened in his favor, and he was set free after some months in Buchenwald. Later, when in the post-war time, Beer was in court helping Winifred Wagner in there in her anti-Nazification process. The case stories of Beer and Links illustrate stereotypes of male homosexual relationships. Beer, a man in his 40s, had a sexual relationship with a man more than 20 years younger. Links had a sexual relationship with a hustler that was also more than 20 years younger, but we do not know how old his long-term partner Helmut Holzer was. Now, the reconstruction of a circle of friends. The Gestapo also found circles of friends that were more or less the same age, like we will see in the following reconstruction of a circle of friends, where most of the involved men are in their 20s. It is unresolved why Oskar Trojan, nicknamed Zwetschge, Plum, was arrested by the Gestapo and interrogated in January 3rd, 1939, less than 2 weeks before his 24th birthday. He confessed from the beginning that he had sex with a man for the first time at the age of 17 in 1932. He had masturbated with Leopold Karlkopf. We see here a police photo of him. This is one of the rare police photos of a gay victim. He had masturbated with Leopold Karlkopf on his way home in a house entrance. 1 year later, in 1933, Karlkopf became his godfather. Well, sex partner and godfather, what a relationship. Oskar was invited to Karlkopf's apartment in Vienna, where he met a group of men. With some of these men, he had sexual encounters over the next years. Some he just knew by name, but he was sure that they were homosexuals as well. One of the men Oskar Trojan mentioned introduced him to Bertolt Windisch, and with Bertolt Windisch, our reconstructions proceeds. In the following, I will try to reconstruct the network of friends and sex partners as it was traced by the officials of the Gestapo in 1939. It started with Oskar Trojan and Bertolt Windisch. In his first inquisition at the Gestapo headquarters, the 27-year-old Windisch denied being homosexual at all and affirmed that he does not know any of the men incriminated by Oskar Trojan as gay. After Bertolt Windisch was, and I quote, remembered thoroughly to tell the truth, he started confessing that he had illicit sexual relationships with 10 different men between 1927 and 1939. We often read the phrase that an accused told the truth after he was thoroughly remembered. Considering the interrogation methods of Gestapo and Kripo, this could mean threats like the abduction to a concentration camp or castration, or it could also mean physical and mental violence. Sorry, where am I? I'm confused. Well, this should be first. Yeah. Sorry, I mixed up the PowerPoint. To give you a better overview over the various relations, I've really drawn it by hand, yeah, as you see, a family tree. But it depicts only an excerpt of Windisch's circle of friends. In the course of the examination, he told the police that one of his partners had committed suicide because he had been forced into a marriage. Another one he knew only by his nickname Hansel. Windisch met Eduard Bruscher, which is the first here, in a toilet in the Prater, the big Viennese amusement park, in 1933. They jerked off together. He assured that he met Bruscher several times in the next years, but they never had sex again. Windisch had known Private Franz Raftel, the second one here, since 1930, but it lasted till 1937 that they frequently had sexual encounters. From 38, summer 38 till January 39, Ernst Breitschuh visited Windisch for sex in his flat 5 to 6 times. Between 33 and 7, he had an uncounted number of sexual encounters with the piano player Walter Blau, who visited him to give him blowjobs, as he said in the interrogation. Blau was popular under the nickname Veronica and piano player in the Gasthaus Neumann at the Spittelberg, a venue that was known for its homosexual guests. Here Windisch also met Walter Bregartner, the last in a row, which will become the second central figure in this circle of friends. At the beginning he denied knowing him, but finally the Gestapo officers forced him to confess that he met Bregartner in winter 1933. When we read the documents today, it is precarious to specify the relationships and the feelings of the persecuted man. The persecutors were not interested if Windisch was in love with any of this man, if they were partners in a relationship. They were only interested in the illicit form of sexual encounters and registered as accountants what they did exactly and how often they did it, if they had an ejaculation or not, and who was the assumed active or passive part. Some of these protocols read like scripts for pornographic movies. For instance, when Karl Seiringer, he was visiting the steam bath of the Esterhazy bath regularly, and he was sitting there for 1 hour in the steam chamber and registered what the men that were going in and coming out did together. And later in the office, he wrote a script in detail for 4, 5, 6 pages what the men did together. It's like a script for a pornographic movie. It's really strange, really strange to read this. But in rare moments, the papers unveil emotions. So Windisch described Walter Bregartner as a good buddy, and that they were good friends for years. The 29-year-old Bregartner, the last one here, was arrested by the Gestapo end of January 1939 because he was named by Windisch. Bregartner confirmed that he met Windisch in winter 1933-1934 in a tavern for homosexuals named Veronica, which is also the name of the piano player from the Gasthaus Neumann, which is the same venue. This Walter Blau is the Veronica. This piano player had a relationship with Windisch. Soon after they met, Bregartner moved to the house in the Praterstraße where Windisch lived, because a room was free in sublease. They lived in separated rooms, but till summer 1937, they had sex once or twice a week, namely, as it is specified, masturbation, oral or anal intercourse. I will follow now the trace of Walter Bregartner. Neither Bregartner nor Windisch lived monogamously. Although they had regular sex together, they regularly had other partners. Some were only one-night stands, like in 1935, Bregartner got to know Ludwig Notch and Paul Hutfles through Windisch. They were both friends of Windisch. With both he masturbated only once, as he confessed in the Gestapo interrogation. So he did also with two unidentified men in the doorway of a house. In 1936 he met Kurt Buschner, with whom he had sex in Buschner's flat. Bregartner testified that he had sex with him for another 4 to 5 times till summer 1937. At the same time he became acquainted with Viktor Stöger, who was also a friend of Windisch. With him he moved to a new flat in the 9th district, so they moved together in one flat and lived together for 3 months. And, as testified, had sex together once or twice a week. In October 1937, he got to know Emil Stürmer, the last in the row, through homosexual friends, but he admitted that he started having sex with him in April 1938, after moving to a new flat in the 17th district. So again, these two men lived together in one flat. Windisch and Stürmer, Bregartner and Stürmer had more than a sexual relationship. After a car accident in December 1937, Bregartner was in hospital and Stürmer visited him regularly, bringing him food from Bregartner's sister. They also visited Bregartner's parents in Zöbing, a small winemaker's village at the Danube. And they kept company till the day of their detention in January 1939. I come back to Windisch, who incriminated the 29-year-old Eduard Bruscher, which I already have mentioned before, with his testimony that he had sex with him in a public toilet in the Prater in 1933. Bruscher was arrested in Knittelfeld, Styria, where he worked as a waiter and was brought back to the Gestapo headquarters in Vienna. Bruscher admitted his encounter with Windisch and that he masturbated with him with another unknown young man on a bench in Prater. But he also testified that he met Hans Nowak, and now the network gets more or less complete, at least the network about which I talk. In 1937, he met Hans Nowak in Windisch's flat. You see, all that are not only sex partners, but that are also friends of Windisch, and are underlined in yellow. So you have this tight connection, this tight circle of young men. Where am I? In 1937, Bruscher met Hans Nowak in Windisch's flat. Nowak was studying theology at the Servites convent in the 9th district. They had only one sexual encounter in Windisch's flat. In further questionings, Bruscher denied that he had any other illicit relationships to men. Because Bruscher put on record that he had a one-night stand with Nowak, Nowak was arrested as well by the Gestapo and thus became the next young man in this network of prosecution. Hans Nowak confessed the relationship to Paul Hutfles, a partner of Bregartner and a friend of Windisch. Hutfles then revealed that he met Josef Liebig on an evening in a Prater coffee house together with Windisch and Ludwig Notch. who had an affair with Walter Bregartner. After Bregartner moved to a new flat with Viktor Stöger, Liebig most probably took over his sublet room in Windisch's apartment, because from then on he lived there. And so Hudflas stayed overnight with him when they came back from drinking from the Prater. It was very close. Praterstraße is very close to the Prater. They slept in one bed and became friends, so Hudflas stayed some more nights at Liebig's. I have to come to an end, even if there would be more men that are involved in this gay network. We can identify Berthold Windisch and Walter Bregartner in the center of a circle of young, sexually active men that are part of a gay subculture. They met each other in gay taverns, like the Gasthaus Neumann or in the Prater. They had more than anonymous sex. Some temporarily lived together, some had, presumably, part-time monogamous relationships, or they became friends apart from a sexual relationship. When we remember the case history of Friedrich Links, he told the Kripo officers that he lived in a long-term relationship, but his Jewish had to flee. From the information we have, we can interpret that he lived in a monogamous relationship that was parted because of the political system changed. Hans Adolf Beer lived in a relationship with a more than 20 years younger man. Stereotypically, this was a form of homosexual relationships that was combined with the accusation of seduction. So the seducers of the youth, as they were named, were persecuted by the Nazis with exceptional strength, which led to Beer's commitment to a concentration camp. From the men that were caught in the network of prosecution, most had anonymous sexual encounters in semi-public places like bathhouses, public toilets or parks, what I have already mentioned, and were arrested by the Kripo in flagranti. Others were detained because Gestapo or Kripo investigated in form of a snowball system. This system is exemplified in the Gestapo investigation that started with the arrest of Oskar Trojan here in this reconstruction. Here we see a variety of relationships, from one-night stands to part-time monogamous relationships and long-term friendships without sex. But all attributions are our interpretations. Like the description of their identity is, because we have no unfiltered information. We always have to consider what we know, we only know from the documents of the prosecution. Postscriptum 1, the penalties. The man at the beginning of the Gestapo investigation, Oskar Trojan, was sentenced to 4 months in prison. Berthold Windisch was sentenced to 1 year in prison. Walter Bregartner to 4 months. We have evidence that he was imprisoned afterwards in the concentration camp Dachau and was part of a labor commando at Mauthausen. We cannot prove if he survived the Nazi time or not yet. Probably someday we will find evidence for that. Hudflas, Notch, Stürmer, Brugger and Nover were incarcerated for 4 months and Liebig for 3 months. Walter Blau, who was Jewish, was able to flee to Belgium. We could not find any sentence for Ranftl, Breitschuh, Buschner or Stöger because the case files are lost or we haven't found them yet. Postscriptum number 2. On the backside of a postcard with his portrait, found as evidence in a search warrant in Eduard Brugger's apartment, we can read a poem I guess you can read the German yourself. I read the translation. It's my poetic translation, so be kind. When your eyes sink on this picture, look at it in silence, as if it was my tombstone, and silently remember me, as one commemorates the dead. In faithful memory, Eduard Bruscher. Thank you for your attention.